Color coding, a visually satisfying method of organization that most of us use in our day-to-day life from time to time. But what if I told you that militaries around the world use color coding to make identifying munitions types more feasible for their soldiers? And this concept really isn't that new at all, as one of the first militaries to use color coding for their munitions was the British Royal Navy in the mid to late 19th century when they started to use different types of ammunitions, and were beginning to see a problem identifying them because all they could really do at the time was just make sure they were extra cautious and didn't mix them up. But the problem is you slip up sometimes, and grabbing the wrong ammunition could spell life or death depending on what you needed it for, or what you were shooting it out of. And while yes, some of the colors are similar, like a lot of countries use black for armor piercing and red for tracers, but the system itself isn't universally agreed upon, so the colors differ from country to country. But we'll go over that toward the end, because for now we're going to go over the ones that we're more familiar with, and that is the NATO countries and the NATO colors. Now, before you jump the gun and think that you have one of these rounds, or you think that your VMAX polymer tip bullets are tracers, no, these aren't polymer tips at all. These are painted rounds that are used by the military, and the paint itself is used to identify what type of round it is. All the rounds that use polymer tips of different colors mean nothing. All it is an identification for what brand it is. They just want to use their own. Like I know Hornady uses red. I think Nosler uses blue, I believe. I'm not sure. Someone fact check me on that. But yeah, none of these are polymer tips. These are all painted tips for bullets with different actual constructions. And that's pretty much what today's episode will entail. So I apologize in advance for my 1 out of 12 colorblind men in my audience versus the 1 out of 200 colorblind women in the audience, as 94.5% of my audience is male, which is honestly a lot lower than I thought it would be. I figured it'd be like 99% or 100. So for you 5.4% of ladies, I appreciate that you're here, all 7 of you. Howdy do, folks, and welcome back to Chambered in History. We're going over the story of cartridges that made history themselves. From back of the drawer relics to big bore bruisers, we're cracking open the brass cases and spilling out the history. Once again, before we officially get into it, I would like to thank you, the viewer or subscriber or whoever you are, for watching this video. You guys have made this so much more worth it and so much more special, and it's been amazing doing this. And I mean, we're at like 2,552 subscribers right now, which is awesome, and I appreciate you guys so much. I separated that word. Also, I'm still looking for a logo for the channel. So if you're feeling artsy or you just want to help out, send your ideas to this link above my head, or my email above my head. I also added it as a link to my channel, or in my channel. I don't know how you would get to it. I don't know. I put it there, so if you want to send it to me, you can go there, or you can just type in this email above my head. I put it in the last video, but that video is performing like dog water. I think I'm still at 300 views. I get about a view or 2 a week on that one, which it's only been out for like 2 weeks, but still, it's really sad. So I'm gonna do it in this one. Hopefully this one does better, gets me some more ideas, because I would really like to start making merch. If I wind up picking yours, you'll get something free in return. I'll give you a little shout out. Honestly, I have a feeling I'm gonna have trouble picking one, so I'll probably wind up narrowing it down and then putting up like a poll on the channel and let y'all vote on it, and we'll go from there. There was one guy who did already send me an idea, and I appreciate him for that, but I want to get some more so I can get some more variants and kind of go from there. So without further ado, let's get into munitions color coding and what that means. So I figured we'd start with probably the most common color tip ammunition, especially here in the US, and the ones that we can mostly get our hands on as far as civilians go, and that is the green tip, otherwise known as the M855. Now, these are light armor piercing bullets, usually in 5.56, a 62 grain 5.56. They contain a semi-steel core, and they're made for piercing light armor like helmets, body armor, thinner walls, less reinforced walls, stuff like that. And though I did just say they're made for piercing armor, they're not technically classified as armor piercing because the core is still technically, I think, 80% lead, and they're not technically classified as armor piercing bullets, so they're not quite as heavily regulated. Sorry, I know it's probably a lot brighter now. I didn't mean to leave, my blinds were closed and I forgot to open them. I just opened them, so it's gonna be brighter from here on out in the video. Sorry. Anyway, so the M855 was originally named the SS109, and it was developed in Belgium in the 1970s for the NATO ammunitions trials. At the time, NATO was using their 5.56 M193 ammo, which was and still is a fantastic round, but the problem was that it lost its penetration power at distance, especially on personal protective armor. So NATO held a trial to find a new standardized round that would penetrate personal protective armor at distances. And this is actually why during the trials, the rounds were tested on Soviet helmets to specifically test if they could penetrate those helmets, which is what they wanted them to penetrate, which is pretty smart if you ask me. Now you may be saying this still doesn't explain why they painted the tips green. Well, while there's no specific reason they're green, when you have a new round that's different from the rounds you were using before, and it's what you want them to be using, you want them to be able to see the difference and know which rounds they're picking up. So they painted them green as they started to phase out the old M193 rounds, and the green color just kind of stuck from there. Little side note, the ATF and the feds actually tried to get this round banned from civilian use in 2015, claiming them to be armor-piercing rounds and using the Law Enforcement Officer Protection Act of 1985, good Lord, to back up their claims. But fortunately, the tyrants lost this battle. As we've already mentioned, the core is still made of 80% lead, so they're not considered armor-piercing rounds. So suck on that, you bunch of mouth-breathing ATF agents. Hope you heard that. See that? You can insult people without using cuss words. It's not that I don't cuss in my normal everyday life, but I particularly try not to cuss in these videos. And I don't know if y'all appreciate that or not, but it's just something I wanted. I wanted you to be able to, like, put this movie or this channel on, and if your kids were in the room, you don't have to be like, get out of here, or, oh, let me change it. You know, I don't like that. So I prefer this to be able to be family friendly, even though it's about bullets and guns. I prefer you not to have to ask your kid to leave the room, or if you're an older person who doesn't particularly like hearing people cuss, you can still enjoy my videos. Anyway, moving on, sorry. Okay, so I figured a good segue from our borderline AP rounds was just to jump right into the real thing with the black tip armor penetrating munitions. With the capability of penetrating up to 1-inch thick steel, the black tip is probably the second most effective armor penetrating round that you can have in the modern day, as it typically uses a tungsten carbide core, which, if you didn't know, tungsten is like one of the densest metals on Earth, either the densest or second densest. So it will punch through just about anything once you get that mug moving fast enough to do it. Now you'll notice I said the second most effective armor penetrating ammunition, and that is only in spite of the existence of the depleted uranium rounds, which are just an entirely different animal. Depleted uranium is crazy, but the thing is they're usually used in cannon sized, like 20 millimeter and up sized ammunition, so I didn't really want to count them today. Plus it doesn't really count in the color coding. The bullet itself is blue, but it doesn't really, oh, crap, sorry guys, those of you with headphones, I'm sorry. But anyway, I figured we wouldn't really throw it in today, but they are awesome, and I would love to go over them one day because it's just sick. So the black tips are a little bit more finicky on the legality side, as a lot of states don't want you to even own them. And if you want to manufacture them, you'll have to have a Class 3 FFL. So don't just go around building them and trying to sell them, or you will go to jail. So, you know, if you have that license, you can probably manufacture them. I don't know how it works with, like, if I had a Class 3 FFL, but I'm in a state that doesn't allow you to own them. I don't know how that would work, but I know you definitely need a license if you're going to be manufacturing them and selling them. But if you're in a state where you don't, pretty sure you can manufacture them and use them, but don't listen to me. This is not legal advice. I'm just letting you know the general rules. But make sure to check your local laws in case you want to own some. So there's multiple reasons why a local government wouldn't want you owning AP rounds or black tips, and I do get that. And one of those reasons is a negligent indoor discharge, in which case, like, if I were to be sitting here and shoot a AP round through my wall, it would go through my entire house. I promise you that. And they don't want someone meeting their maker a little bit earlier than expected from a bullet coming 4 houses over through all of them. A lot of this is because most of the time black tips are in 50 BMG. And if you ND in a house with 50 BMG, especially with a tungsten carbide tip or core, it's going through everything. I don't care who you are, but that's one of the reasons. Another reason is for law enforcement protection, because law enforcement does have plates and personal protective gear, but the problem is if you're shooting black tips, a lot of times those armors aren't rated for those because that's not what they typically run into pretty much ever. So they're not going to be able to hold up to it. And I get that. That makes sense. You don't want I mean, it depends. The Second Amendment is for tyrannical governments, and if the police show up and they're being tyrannical, aside from that, I'm probably going to cut this out. So when does a black tip really come in handy? Well, as I've mentioned, for a civilian, almost never. You almost never need a true armor-penetrating round with a tungsten core, ever. But where they really do shine is for their intended users, for law enforcement and militaries. But when do they use them? Well, again, we arrive at personal protective armor. Black tips can get through just about any cheap PPE, military PPE, or, just any kind of plates, But the problem is the world is advancing pretty quickly, and throughout the years, plates have gotten better and better. I'm pretty sure there's some out there that can probably hold up to a black tip now. But the thing is, they just keep getting better, so these rounds are also going to have to improve eventually to still be able to penetrate them. Another use for black tips is disabling vehicles, or just hitting vehicles, because when you send a tungsten carbide core through a engine block, it's almost guaranteed to cause catastrophic engine failure, especially if multiple of them are sent through the cast iron structure. But if you have a round that will blow through an engine block without problem, it probably goes through the doors pretty well too, which is another use that these things are used for, and just freaking hole punching an entire vehicle, because almost every time it will go through, I'm just going to say every time it will blow through both doors and probably whoever was sitting in between them. So getting rid of whoever's in the car is no problem when you have black tips. So I'd say it's pretty safe to say black tips are a car's worst nightmare, or one of their worst nightmares. We're getting to more, but yeah. And lastly, we have buildings and structures. Now, like I already mentioned, one of the reasons that they're illegal in some states is their effectiveness against buildings and structures. Because again, especially out of a 50 BMG, if you're using black tips, these things are basically made for taking out a robber in your neighbor's house behind the fridge in the furthest possible room, on the outside of the house. There's no hiding from the black pill of penetration, and that's what they wind up using them for. Unless the building has reinforced concrete walls or steel walls, there is no hiding from this thing. It will get to you. Now, to take a little break from our AP rounds and our AP adjacent rounds, we're going to take a look at our little friends, the blue tip incendiaries. Now, in the early days of incendiary ammunition or development during World War I, they were using the 11mm Vickers tipped with white phosphorus for taking down observation balloons filled with hydrogen gas. We mentioned this in our episode over the 11mm Vickers, but they would basically leave a trail of blue smoke, and for this reason they were called smoke tracers. But this was the beginning of incendiary technology before they figured out to put the incendiary part inside of it so that it wouldn't burn all the way there. Because the thing is, those 11mm incendiary rounds, basically tracers, were only really effective from 100 to 300 yards, give or take, and would kind of burn out. Because, again, it was on the outside. So when they would fire, it would ignite all the way there, and it would burn out if you weren't within a certain distance. But like I mentioned, these weren't real incendiary rounds, they were just tracers, but it was the best they had at the time. Later, in World War II, true incendiary rounds were made by Major Dixon and Woolwich Arsenal and found a new purpose, taking down bombers. Now, they weren't any more effective than regular rounds when they hit pretty much anywhere on the plane. But the thing is, when they would come in contact with the fuel or a fuel line, they would ignite it and make them burn up. So they were very effective at doing that. So as long as you hit the gas tank or something, they were extremely effective against those bomber planes. Through a long repeat of trial and error, they eventually developed something that truly suited their needs. This round was called the B Mark V or Mark IV or 6. I don't know Roman numerals very well. Here it is. It's VI. Sorry. But anyway, it utilized a nitrocellulose filling as well as a steel ball in the tip to aid in ignition. These were true incendiaries as they would not ignite until impact, unlike their tracer ancestors. The Americans, though, in the end, were using their M23 incendiaries, which were the improved design over their previous M1 and M20 incendiaries, all of which featured a blue painted tip and were being used in their Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns. Now, the problem, even with the M23, was that they had this issue where when under sustained fire, when the barrel started getting really hot, the incendiaries would just start igniting before they got to their actual target. They would just, they were igniting because they were getting so hot, it was igniting the fuel inside, and that was an issue because that makes them pretty much useless. The round was later further developed to now feature a larger container cup, a new incendiary mixture, and the weight was increased from 512 grains to 550 grains, and was now dubbed the M23E1. Now, unfortunately, this did not fix the problems they were having with the premature detonation. Later, due to production complications at Frankfurt Arsenal, the production of the M23E1 was transferred over to Twin Cities Arsenal, who didn't necessarily fix the issue with the premature detonation, but did make it a lot better. In the modern day, blue tip incendiary ammunition is almost exclusively used in 50 caliber sniper rifles and machine guns to ignite fuel in vehicles, wooden structures, munitions depots, pretty much anything that's combustible that belongs to their enemy or has enemies around it. Though also in the modern day, regular just flat out incendiary rounds aren't used quite as often in the military, as we usually use something that is a combination of armor piercing and incendiary rounds, giving us probably our most seamless transition of the day into the big bad silver tips. Now, the M8 silver tips, as mentioned, are armor piercing incendiary combination rounds. Now, these are mostly used for armored yet flammable targets and are typically chambered in 50 BMG. Although I have found that there are some old 30-06 APIs out there, armor piercing incendiary, but they're mostly collector's items and just stuff people want to collect from, the past. Now, these rounds usually consist of a manganese molybdenum steel core, a incendiary mix in the tip, a copper jacket, and lead filler. Now, I don't know if I said the molybdenum word right. I might have just said it right just then, but I just said molybdenum because it made it a lot easier to say. I might have misspelled it, but I'm pretty sure that's how it was spelled, because I'm pretty sure I remember thinking this is weird. Anyway, moving on. Now, these rounds may not use the tungsten carbide core that the black tips are using, but remember, these are usually being sent out of a 50 BMG, meaning they're going to probably put a hole in whatever you're shooting them at anyway. And again, these also aren't just armor-piercing rounds. They're not just made for punching holes. These are also incendiaries. So if your enemy thinks that they can put a little extra steel plating around their wooden shack or a little extra steel plating around their gas tank in their vehicle, no. Not if the M8 silver tip has anything to say about it, and it typically does. So just keep that in mind. Moving on. Then we have our red tip tracers and their cousins. Now, tracers have been around for a long time. We had the British using them in their 303 British in 1915. We had Americans using them in their 30-06s in 1917. And then we had, again, the 11mm Vickers using them. Nowadays, tracers are used for things like tracking shots or just visualizing your line of fire, but the problem is that works both ways. So you want to be careful when you're using them not to completely give away your position to your enemy, but you also want to know where your round's going, so you kind of have to play with it and use different types of tracers, as we'll go over here in a minute. Now, in the beginning, tracers were, again, the world really just taking a stab at creating incendiary ammunition, but they weren't real incendiaries because they burned mid-air, making them tracers. But again, it was all they had. This was an incendiary to the early developers of incendiary and tracer rounds. And yes, it worked. They're just not as effective as the stuff that we've come up with in the modern day, or shortly after they figured out the tracers. But I've learned through doing this episode that there are actually different types of tracers. We have our regular red tip tracers, which are, your regular brightness. We have our orange M10 tracers, which are dim tracers and are seen better with night vision, but I'm pretty sure you can still see them at night. It's just you can see them a lot better with night vision. So they're, again, for when you're shooting at night and you don't want to completely give away your position. Because if the enemy doesn't have night vision, they won't be able to see it quite as well, and it helps you out a little bit. Then you have the M21 headlight tracers, which are typically used for air-to-air combat, as they are, I think, the brightest tracer you can get your hands on, or anyone can use, because they are 3 times brighter than your regular red tip tracer. Then you have your yellow tipped observation rounds, which are more for visualizing your point of impact rather than the whole trajectory of the bullet, because they don't burn in midair. There's a little puff of smoke and a flash, I think, when it hits, so you can see where you hit without actually allowing anyone to trace a line back to where you are. They're not technically tracers, but I figured I would throw them in here because they're still tracer-esque, because they still show you where you're hitting. They're not made for destruction or anything like that. They're made for visualizing where you're shooting. You also have the yellow and red tipped observation / tracer combo rounds for when you do want both. We have the silver and red tip armor piercing incendiary tracers. We have the lavender and silver tip armor piercing incendiary dim tracers used by our Navy, and even the M962 saboed light armor piercing tracers, or the slap T, which uses a sabot as implied, and a red colored sabot to signify that it is a tracer. So as you can tell, there's a whole heaping pile of tracer ammunition and different types of tracer ammunition, because like I said, you can add a tracer element to just about any round. But there's one way of using tracers that I find the most interesting, and that is its use in the Marine Corps' small or shoulder-launched multi-purpose assault weapon. Oh, yeah, nice, I got it. Which in short is just a rocket launcher, but it also has a 9x51mm rifle strapped to the side of it, which uses tracer rounds that follow the exact same path, or about the exact same path, as the rocket that they're firing, because rockets are typically not exactly something you're carrying in abundance, so you don't want to miss. So what they do is they will shoot the rifle and watch the tracer go to the target, and when they finally get it at about the level they want it to, they fire the rocket, because again, rockets are, one, expensive, and two, usually a limited supply, so you don't want to just be wasting them missing. So to me, that's pretty genius, and I think it's awesome. I saw a video of it the other day, and I thought it was sick. It was cool. Now we have one more combination round I'd like to go over, and that is the silver and green tip Raufoss, I think that's how you say it, M211 high explosive armor penetrating incendiary rounds. These little devils are absolutely wild and completely devastating when used on their intended targets. These feature an incendiary compound in the tip, just like a regular incendiary, a tungsten carbide core, just like the black tips, and a secondary compound, incendiary compound near the core of the round, all wrapped up tight in a copper jacket. So upon impact, the first incendiary charge will go off right before the tungsten carbide core makes its entry and punches a hole in whatever you put it in. And then ideally, the second charge will go off your now punctured target, exploding inside and filling whatever you hit it with absolutely hellacious destruction and chaos and their worst nightmare. Now these babies are again armor penetrating rounds, so they only really do all this whenever you hit them with something with enough resistance to cause all of this whole chain reaction to go off. Now they're still devastatingly lethal against a soft target like a person, but the thing is, if you're too soft and you don't cause that round to do everything, you're just not going to get the whole shebang. So they're useful all around, but you get the full effect when you hit something with some armor, because then it really makes it work and do all of its magic. Okay, so we've covered the NATO colors, but like I mentioned before, we don't have a universal system worldwide for color coding ammunitions, at least yet. So maybe you want to know about Russia or China's color coding system. Well, lucky for you, I have them right here. So let's get into them before we wrap everything up. Now, Russia and China actually shared the same coloring system until 1967, when China decided to make one of their own, but I will specify so you don't have to worry about knowing which is which. But before we get into it, let's do a quick recap. We have green, light armor penetrating; black, armor penetrating; blue, incendiary; silver, armor piercing incendiary; red, tracers; yellow, observation; orange, dim tracer; yellow and red, observation and tracer; silver and red, armor piercing incendiary tracers; silver and lavender, armor piercing incendiary tracer, dim tracers; red sabot tracer; and finally the silver and green high explosive armor piercing incendiary. Whew. That's all of them. That's what we went over just now. Okay, on to Russia. We have red for incendiary, violet is armor piercing, black and red is armor piercing incendiary, violet and red is armor piercing incendiary tracer, green is tracer, and white is light armor piercing. And now for China. Now again, China came up with their own color coding system after 1967, but again, they didn't change everything. They didn't completely change the whole system, so we're just going to go over the ones that they did change. Spoiler, they only changed two. From what I can tell, that was just the black and red armor piercing incendiary just got changed to just black. And the violet and red armor piercing incendiary tracers just got changed to just violet. So I figured that was worth mentioning, but I'm not going to do a full list just to have only two be different. So fairly different, and I would say a NATO soldier would probably have some trouble if they wind up resorting to having to use Russian or Chinese ammunition, because obviously we have some different effects with what we're using. Well, folks, that about does it for today. I hope y'all enjoyed today's episode, as I know I really enjoyed making this episode and writing it and doing it. Again, don't forget, I'm still trying to get a logo for the channel, so if you don't mind, send me your designs and I can come up with something or we'll come up with something and get some merch made for those of you that want it. And again, whoever comes up with the best one, I'll probably wind up sending them something. Also, next episode was going to be over the super fast 30 caliber rounds, but there's not as many as I thought there was. So if y'all have some that are, let's say 4,000 feet per second and higher, or 3,800 and higher, send them my way, because I was having trouble finding some. So I was thinking about doing the most powerful rounds ever, at least for something a person can buy. You know, stuff like the 50 cal and stuff like that. But I kind of started on that one. So hopefully we can get something out, and whatever comes out, it's going to be cool. So just tune in next week or week after next. Depends on when I get it done, and you know, we'll make something happen. It'll be cool. Anyway, folks, don't forget to like, comment, and hit that subscribe button. We're still trying to reach 3,000 subscribers. We're at 2,550 right now. Like I said, it's been going great. Y'all are doing amazing. I love y'all. But until then, keep your powder dry, your brass polished, and always stay chambered in history. Thank you.